The sun set over Ridgewood County, casting long shadows across the small desk where Zora Williams sorted through case files. 3 years. That's how long she'd been living this double life. From the outside, she was just another community college professor, driving her modest sedan to campus each morning, grading papers at local coffee shops, and living in a simple apartment on the east side of town. But beneath this carefully crafted exterior was one of the Drug Enforcement Administration's most dedicated agents. The assignment had started with whispers and rumors. Too many citizens, particularly people of color, coming forward with similar stories. Traffic stops for minor infractions or sometimes no real reason at all, searches conducted without consent, and then, mysteriously, drugs appearing in vehicles where the owner swore nothing had been before. They're planting evidence, Zora's supervisor had told her 3 years ago, sliding a folder across his desk. And we need someone on the inside to prove it. That someone became Zora. With her background in criminal justice and psychology, she was perfect for deep cover work. The DEA created her new identity with painstaking detail: a teaching position at Ridgewood Community College, a rental apartment with a history of previous tenants, even social media accounts with years of backdated posts. Tonight, she rubbed her tired eyes and took another sip of now-cold coffee. The wall of her apartment was covered with photos, names, and red string connections, all hidden behind a sliding bookcase when anyone visited. Officer Raymond Briggs, Officer Brendan Nichols, Sergeant Thomas Kelly, and at least 4 others she suspected were involved in the corruption ring. Her phone buzzed with a text from her handler, Agent Chen. Progress update requested. Higher-ups getting anxious, Zora sighed. 3 years of work. And while she had plenty of circumstantial evidence and testimony from victims, she lacked the smoking gun that would bring the whole operation down. She needed to catch them in the act, preferably with her as the target. Working on final phase, she texted back. Need more time. She stood and stretched, walking to the window to look out at the quiet street below. Her neighbors knew her as the friendly professor, who sometimes brought homemade cookies to community meetings. None of them knew about the gun she kept locked in a hidden compartment, or the secure satellite phone she used to communicate with DEA headquarters. Tomorrow would be another day of teaching classes on criminal justice. Ironic, given her actual purpose. She taught her students about the importance of ethical policing, while secretly gathering evidence against officers who had betrayed their badges. The double life sometimes wore on her, especially the isolation. No real friendships, no dating, no family visits. Everything was secondary to the mission. On her desk sat a small framed photo of her parents, both former civil rights attorneys who had instilled in her a deep sense of justice. "This is why I'm doing this," she whispered to their smiling faces. Her research had shown a pattern in the corrupt officers' activities. They targeted specific types of drivers on specific routes, usually during evening shifts when supervision was minimal. She had been driving these routes regularly, making herself a potential target, but so far they hadn't taken the bait. The next phase of her plan was riskier. She would need to raise her profile slightly, become more noticeable to the corrupt officers. Her handler had authorized her to make a few strategic moves: a slightly nicer car with out-of-county plates, a few careful comments in the local diner frequented by police officers, perhaps a calculated interaction or two that would put her on their radar. The DEA had equipped her vehicle with hidden cameras and audio recording devices, virtually undetectable unless someone knew exactly what to look for. Everything was in place. She just needed the corrupt officers to make their move. Zora closed the case files and slid the evidence board back behind the bookcase. Tomorrow she would begin the final phase of the operation. After 3 years of patience and preparation, she was ready to spring the trap. All she needed was for the right officer to pull her over. Her final thought before falling asleep was of all the people who had been wrongly convicted because of planted evidence. People serving years in prison for crimes they didn't commit. Their lives shattered by corrupt officers who abused their power. For them, she would see this through, no matter the personal cost. As dawn broke over Ridgewood County, Zora dressed with purpose, selecting her outfit carefully, professional but forgettable. Nothing that would stand out in someone's memory. She checked her hidden cameras, confirmed all recording devices were functioning, and headed out to her car. Today might be the day everything changed, or it might be just another day of waiting and watching. Either way, she was committed to exposing the truth no matter how long it took. Rain pattered against the windshield as Zora drove home from campus. The evening had settled in early, darkness creeping across the sky. By 30, she'd stayed late grading papers, part of maintaining her cover as a dedicated professor, and now navigated the slick roads with careful attention. Her mind wandered to the class she'd taught earlier. The irony never escaped her. Lecturing on ethics in law enforcement while undercover to catch corrupt officers. Today's topic had been particularly fitting: the erosion of community trust when those sworn to protect abuse their power. The flash of blue and red lights in her rearview mirror snapped her back to full alertness. Her heart rate quickened, but her training kicked in immediately. Stay calm, act natural. Be the professor, not the agent. She pulled over carefully, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. Through her mirrors, she could see 2 officers in the patrol car. One remained seated while the other approached her window. The beam of a flashlight swept across her interior before landing on her face. "License and registration, please," said the officer, rain dripping from his hat. Zora recognized him immediately. Officer Brendan Nichols, one of her primary suspects. "Of course, officer," she said, reaching slowly for her glove compartment. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" "Your taillight's out," he said, though she knew that wasn't true. She had checked all her lights just yesterday, standard procedure for her cover. She handed over her documents, all perfectly crafted to support her cover identity. "I had no idea about the taillight. Thank you for letting me know." Nichols studied her license with unusual intensity. "Professor Williams at the community college?" "That's right," she said, adding just the right amount of nervousness that an innocent person might show when pulled over. "Where are you heading tonight, Professor?" His questions were excessive for a simple traffic stop, exactly the pattern reported by previous victims. "Just home from work. I stayed late grading midterms." She gestured to the stack of papers visible on her passenger seat. "Sit tight," Nichols said, returning to his patrol car with her documents. Through her side mirror, Zora watched carefully. Nichols was talking to his partner, who now stepped out of the vehicle. The second officer, she recognized him as Officer Luis Vega, began walking around her car, shining his flashlight across the exterior. This was it. The pattern was unfolding exactly as described by previous victims. One officer keeps the driver occupied while the other examines the vehicle and potentially plants evidence. Vega lingered near her trunk, and in her rearview mirror, Zora could see his hand move toward his pocket, then toward her car. The hidden camera installed near her license plate would be capturing everything. Nichols returned to her window. "Professor, do you mind if we take a look in your vehicle? Just a routine check." "Do you have probable cause, Officer Nichols?" she asked, intentionally using his name though he hadn't introduced himself. A small psychological play to make him slightly uncomfortable. He hesitated, clearly surprised she knew his name. "Your taillight violation gives us reason for a search, ma'am. And I notice you seem nervous." "I'm not nervous, officer. I'm aware of my rights," she said calmly. "Unless you have specific reason to believe I'm involved in criminal activity, I don't consent to a search." This was the crucial moment. If they were planning to plant evidence, her refusal wouldn't stop them. They'd claim probable cause or simply do it anyway. And that's exactly what she needed them to do on camera. "Step out of the vehicle, please," Nichols said, his tone hardening. Zora complied, standing in the rain as Nichols directed her to the front of the car, where he could keep an eye on her. Meanwhile, Vega was already opening her trunk. "Officer, I'd like to state again that I do not consent to this search," she said loudly enough for the hidden microphones to pick up clearly. "Well, that's too bad," Nichols replied with a slight smirk, "because my partner just observed what appears to be drug paraphernalia in plain view through your window." This was a lie. There was nothing of the sort in her car, but it was exactly the false pretense she had been waiting for. The trap was set. From her position at the front of the car, Zora could see Vega's reflection in her side mirror. He was reaching into his jacket pocket, then leaning into her trunk. Seconds later, he called out, "Hey, Nichols, take a look at this." Vega's voice carried a tone of manufactured triumph. Nichols kept one eye on Zora as he backed toward the trunk. Well, Professor. Want to explain what my partner found?" Zora didn't need to look. She knew exactly what they'd found because they had just planted it themselves. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Officer," she replied evenly. Vega emerged from behind the car, holding up a small package wrapped in plastic. "Looks like someone's been dealing on campus," he said with a smug expression. "That's not mine," Zora stated firmly, allowing a hint of outrage to enter her voice, just as any innocent person would react. "They all say that." Nichols laughed, reaching for his handcuffs. "Professor Zora Williams, you're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute." Rain streamed down her face as Nichols roughly grabbed her arm, spinning her around to face her car. This was the moment she had worked 3 years for. Every second was being recorded. Every action documented. The evidence she needed was finally in her hands. As Nichols began reciting her rights, his voice confident and practiced, Zora allowed herself one small smile, hidden from the officer's view. They thought they had caught an easy target. They had no idea they had just trapped themselves. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists, cold metal against her skin. It was time to spring the trap. The rain came down harder now, soaking through Zora's light jacket as Officer Nichols marched her toward the patrol car. She could have revealed her identity immediately, but her training and instincts told her to wait. Let them dig themselves deeper. Let the cameras capture every moment of their corrupt actions. "You're making a big mistake," she said, loud enough for the microphones to pick up her voice over the drumming rain. "Save it for the judge, Professor," Vega laughed, carrying the planted package of drugs with latex-gloved hands, a show of procedure that would look legitimate on their body cameras. "Smart lady like you should know better." Nichols pushed her head down as he guided her into the back seat of the patrol car. The door slammed shut and Zora took a deep breath. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and she might not have enough evidence to ensure convictions. Too late, and she risked being processed at the station before revealing herself. Through the rain-streaked window, she watched the 2 officers talking by her car, occasionally glancing back at her with smug expressions. Vega slapped Nichols on the shoulder, a congratulatory gesture. They thought they'd made an easy arrest that would boost their stats and maybe even lead to a promotion. Nichols returned to the patrol car and slid into the driver's seat. "Got yourself in quite a situation, Professor. Teaching criminal justice while dealing on the side. Ironic, isn't it?" "Extremely ironic," Zora replied, her voice calm and steady. "But not in the way you think." Something in her tone made Nichols turn to look at her. His eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that you and Officer Vega just committed a federal offense. On camera." She leaned forward slightly. "And it's all been recorded." Nichols laughed, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "Lady, I don't know what you're talking about. We caught you fair and square with drugs in your trunk." Vega opened the passenger door and climbed in, still holding the evidence bag containing the planted drugs. "What's she saying?" "She thinks we're on camera or something," Nichols replied, the confidence in his voice wavering slightly. Zora straightened up in her seat. The moment had arrived. "Officers, I think it's time I introduce myself properly." She shifted position, reaching awkwardly into her back pocket despite the handcuffs. "I'd like to show you something." "Hey, stop moving back there," Vega snapped, turning around in his seat. With some difficulty, Zora managed to extract her DEA credentials from her pocket. "My name is not just Professor Zora Williams. I'm Special Agent Williams with the Drug Enforcement Administration." She held up her badge and ID. "And I am working on a federal investigation into corruption and evidence planting in this department." The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the rain beating against the roof of the patrol car and the occasional crackle of the police radio. The color drained from Nichols's face as he stared at the badge. Vega's mouth hung slightly open, the evidence bag suddenly feeling like it was burning his fingers. That's not real," Nichols finally stammered, but there was no conviction in his voice. "It's very real," Zora replied calmly, "as are the 4 hidden cameras in my vehicle that just recorded you planting drugs in my trunk. The cameras are still recording, by the way, transmitting everything to a secure DEA server." She nodded toward their dash camera. "And I'm guessing your body cams are on too, which means you've helpfully provided additional evidence from your perspective. Though I suspect you might be tempted to delete that footage now." Vega swallowed hard, looking down at the evidence bag in his hands like it had suddenly transformed into a live snake. "You can't prove anything," he said, but his voice cracked. Actually, I can, Zora continued, maintaining her composure. For the past 3 years, I've been tracking a pattern of suspicious arrests in Ridgewood County. Specifically, cases where drugs mysteriously appeared in vehicles during routine traffic stops, disproportionately targeting people of color, I might add. She looked directly at Nichols. Did you really think no one would notice? That the DEA wouldn't eventually investigate when conviction rates for certain officers were statistically impossible? Nichols' hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The reality of the situation was sinking in. What happens now? He asked, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. Now, Zora said, leaning back in her seat, you have a choice to make. You can either uncuff me and acknowledge that you've been caught in a federal sting operation, or you can continue with this arrest, take me to the station, and try to explain to your superiors why you've arrested a federal agent conducting an authorized investigation. She smiled slightly. Either way, I'll be making some phone calls very soon. The question is, how deep do you want this hole to get before you stop digging? The rain continued to pound on the roof as the two officers exchanged panicked glances. Their perfect record, their rising careers, their freedom, everything hung in the balance of the next few moments. Nichols' shoulders slumped in defeat. Vega, uncuff her, he said quietly. Are you serious? Vega hissed. We can't just do it. Nichols cut him off. It's over. Vega reluctantly got out of the car and opened the back door. The rain had lessened somewhat, but water still dripped from his uniform as he reached in with the handcuff key. As the cuffs released, Zora rubbed her wrists and fixed both officers with a steady gaze. Smart decision. Now here's what happens next. You're both going to follow me to the federal building downtown. My team is already waiting there. You'll surrender your weapons and badges temporarily while this situation is processed. You can't, Vega started to protest. I can and I will, Zora interrupted firmly. This isn't a negotiation. It's the best option you have right now, and believe me, the alternatives are much worse. She stepped out of the patrol car, standing tall despite her rain-soaked clothes. For 3 years she had lived a lie to uncover the truth. Now, watching the shocked faces of the corrupt officers who thought they were untouchable, she felt a profound sense of satisfaction. I'll drive my own car, she said. You follow behind. Any deviation from that route, any attempt to flee or dispose of evidence, and I'll add obstruction of justice to the growing list of charges. As she walked back to her vehicle, Zora pulled out her secure phone and dialed her handler. Agent Chen, it's Williams. The trap worked. I've got them. Send the team to the federal building. She glanced back at the patrol car where the two officers sat in stunned silence. We're about to blow this case wide open. News travels fast in a police department. By morning, everyone knew that Officers Nichols and Vega had been caught in a federal sting operation. The hallways of the Ridgewood County Police Department buzzed with whispered conversations that abruptly stopped whenever a superior walked by. Zora sat in a conference room at the federal building, watching footage from her hidden cameras with her handler, Agent Chen, and 2 attorneys from the Justice Department. The evidence was damning. Clear video of Vega planting the drugs in her trunk while Nichols kept her distracted. This is just the beginning, Zora said. Pausing the video. Nichols and Vega are part of a larger network. They've been doing this for years, targeting specific demographics, boosting their arrest records, and ruining innocent lives. Agent Chen nodded. We've already pulled case files for every arrest these two made in the past 5 years. The pattern is clear once you know what to look for. But we need more. We need the whole network. The door opened and Assistant Director Thompson walked in, his face serious. Williams, excellent work. The U.S. Attorney is ready to move forward with charges against Nichols and Vega. But I understand you believe there are more officers involved. At least 5 more, possibly including Sergeant Kelly, who supervises the night shift. Zora replied, pulling up a file on her laptop. These officers have suspiciously high arrest rates for drug possession during traffic stops. And look at these statistics. She turned the screen to show a chart. 80% of their discoveries of drugs involve minority drivers. Thompson studied the data, his frown deepening. We'll need more than statistical analysis to bring charges. I've been building relationships with some of their victims, Zora explained. People who maintained their innocence but took plea deals because they couldn't fight the charges. With Nichols and Vega facing federal time, some of these officers might be willing to cut deals. They could give us the whole operation, Thompson sat down, considering the strategy. What about your cover? Is it blown? Completely, Zora admitted. By now, everyone in the department knows about the DEA agent who posed as a professor for 3 years. My undercover days in Ridgewood are over. We'll need to move you to a safe location, Chen interjected. Once word gets out about your role, there could be retaliation from officers we haven't identified yet. Zora nodded, though the thought of leaving her apartment, her home for 3 years, left her with a strange sense of loss. I understand, but I want to see this through. I want to be part of the interviews, the case building. These officers destroyed lives with their actions. There's something else you should know, Thompson said, sliding a folder across the table. Internal Affairs has received 3 calls since this morning. Officers wanting to talk. Apparently, not everyone in the department was comfortable with what Nichols and his crew were doing. Zora opened the folder, scanning the names. Officer Patel, Officer Washington, Officer Rivera. I know them. They're good cops. I've observed them during my time here. They say they suspected what was happening but were afraid to come forward, Thompson explained. Afraid of retaliation, of being labeled rats. But now they see an opening, Chen added. With federal involvement, they feel protected enough to speak up. Zora felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, these officers had stayed silent while their colleagues ruined innocent lives. On the other hand, she understood the blue wall of silence, the pressures to conform, the fear of standing alone. I want to talk to them, she said firmly. Today, Thompson nodded. Arranged. They'll be here at 2. The meeting with the 3 officers revealed more than Zora had hoped for. They confirmed her suspicions about Sergeant Kelly's involvement and identified 2 more officers in the corruption ring. More importantly, they provided dates, locations, specific cases where they believed evidence had been planted. I transferred out of Kelly's unit after 3 months, Officer Washington explained, his hands clasped tightly on the table. I couldn't stand what I was seeing, but I was too scared to report it. They made it clear what happens to cops who rat on other cops. They called it padding the stats, Officer Patel added, disgust evident in her voice, like it was just a game to them, not real people whose lives they were destroying. Officer Rivera, the youngest of the 3, looked close to tears. There was this one case that still haunts me. A young mother, 2 kids in the car. Nichols found drugs in her diaper bag. She kept saying they weren't hers, begging us to believe her. She lost custody of her children because of that arrest. Zora made a note of the case. We'll look into it. Every single case they touched will be reviewed. By evening, the investigation had expanded dramatically. Internal Affairs had launched their own parallel investigation. The police commissioner, eager to distance himself from the scandal, held a press conference promising full cooperation with federal authorities and a comprehensive review of departmental practices. But not everyone was happy with the revelations. As Zora left the federal building that night, escorted by Agent Chen to a hotel where she'd be staying temporarily, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You should have minded your own business, Agent Williams. Cops take care of cops. Remember that. She showed the message to Chen, who immediately took her phone to trace the sender. This is exactly why we're moving you to a secure location, he said, his expression grim. I'm not afraid, Zora replied, though the message had sent a chill through her. This just confirms we're on the right track. Back in her hotel room, Zora stared out the window at the lights of Ridgewood County. For 3 years she had lived a double life, always alert, always acting, never truly herself. Now her cover was blown, but in some ways she felt more hidden than ever. Her apartment, her classroom, her carefully constructed routine, all gone in an instant. A knock at the door made her jump. Agent Chen entered, looking troubled. We've got a problem, he said without preamble. Someone leaked details about the case to the press. Tomorrow's morning edition will name names, including officers we haven't officially connected to the corruption yet. Is that bad? Zora asked. Public pressure might help our case. It could also send suspects running, or worse, destroy evidence before we can secure it, Chen explained. And there's more. The leak included details about you, your undercover role, even the building where your apartment is located. Zora sank into a chair, the implications clear. So I can't go home. Not now, maybe not ever. I'm sorry, Chen said quietly. Your safety is our priority. We're arranging a new identity, a new location. She nodded, understanding the necessity but feeling the loss nonetheless. 3 years of her life, friendships she'd made, students she'd taught, All of it would now exist only in her memory. "What about the case?" she asked. "I need to see it through." "You will," Chan assured her, just from a different angle. "The U.S. Attorney wants your testimony for the grand jury next week. Your evidence is the cornerstone of this case." Later that night, unable to sleep, Zora scrolled through news articles about the unfolding scandal. The story was exploding, with national outlets picking it up. Video clips from her hidden cameras, carefully edited to protect ongoing investigations, had gone viral. Social media was filled with outrage, calls for justice, demands for reform. In one sense, it was everything she had worked for. The corruption exposed, the guilty facing consequences, the possibility of justice for those wrongfully convicted. But in the quiet of her hotel room, far from the life she had built, Zora Williams wondered about the cost of truth and whether the system she had devoted her life to could truly change. 6 months had passed since that rainy night when officers Nichols and Vega had unwittingly sealed their own fate. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as journalists and spectators filled the hallways, all hoping to witness the conclusion of what had become known nationwide as the Ridgewood corruption trial. Zora Williams adjusted her blazer as she waited in a small preparation room. Today she would give her final testimony. Her hair was shorter now, styled differently, part of her new identity measures, but her purpose remained unchanged. She had spent the past 6 months helping prosecutors build an airtight case against 7 officers from the Ridgewood County Police Department. A gentle knock on the door announced the arrival of U.S. Attorney Patricia Doherty. "Agent Williams, we're ready for you." "Are you prepared?" Zora nodded, gathering her notes. "I've been preparing for this day for 3.5 years. The courtroom fell silent as Zora entered and made her way to the witness stand. She had testified earlier in the trial, explaining her undercover role and the evidence she had gathered, but today's testimony would connect all the pieces, the final nail in the corruption ring's coffin. As she was sworn in, Zora surveyed the defendants. Nichols and Vega sat with their attorneys, their faces haggard from months of legal proceedings and public scrutiny. Sergeant Kelly, once the respected supervisor of the night shift, now looked diminished in his civilian clothes. 4 other officers completed the group, all implicated by evidence, testimony from victims, and most damningly, by each other as they scrambled to cut deals with prosecutors. "Agent Williams," Attorney Doherty began, "could you summarize for the jury what your investigation uncovered about the systematic corruption within the Ridgewood County Police Department?" Zora took a deep breath. This was the moment to bring together 3 years of work. "Our investigation revealed an organized operation within the department," she began, her voice clear and steady. "A group of officers, led by Sergeant Kelly, developed a system to increase arrest numbers, particularly drug arrests, by planting evidence on innocent civilians during routine traffic stops." She explained how the corruption had started small, a single officer planting drugs on someone he personally disliked, and had evolved into a methodical operation that targeted specific demographics in specific neighborhoods. "The pattern was clear," she continued. "These officers disproportionately targeted people of color, people they believed couldn't fight back effectively, those with limited resources, prior records, or undocumented status. They shared techniques for planting evidence, for ensuring dash cameras wouldn't capture the act, for writing reports that would withstand scrutiny." Throughout her testimony, Zora referenced specific cases, specific victims whose lives had been upended by false arrests and convictions. The young mother officer Rivera had mentioned, a college student who lost his scholarship after a wrongful conviction, an elderly man who spent 8 months in jail awaiting trial for drugs that weren't his. These weren't just statistics, she told the silent courtroom. These were lives destroyed by officers who abused their power and betrayed public trust. When Doherty finished her questioning, the defense attorneys took their turns attempting to undermine Zora's testimony. They questioned her methods, her motivations, the legality of her undercover operation. They suggested she had targeted these specific officers due to personal bias. They implied the DEA had manufactured evidence to justify an expensive, years-long investigation. Throughout the cross-examination, Zora remained composed, answering each question directly, referring to evidence already submitted to the court. The defense's efforts felt increasingly desperate as they tried to find cracks in her testimony. After 4 hours on the stand, she was finally excused. As she stepped down, her eyes briefly met those of Officer Nichols. The smug confidence he had shown on that rainy night was long gone, replaced by a mixture of anger and defeat. He knew, as did everyone in the courtroom, that the evidence against him was overwhelming. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of reporters waited, but Zora slipped out a side entrance with Agent Chen. Her public role in the case had made her a target, necessitating continued security measures. "You did well in there," Chen said as they drove away. "The jury was with you the whole time. I could see it on their faces." "What happens after the verdict?" Zora asked. The question had been on her mind for months. The case had consumed her life for so long that its conclusion left her future uncertain. "That depends on what you want," Chen replied. "The director is impressed with your work. There's talk of a promotion, maybe a supervisory role in the New York office. Or if you want to return to field work, there are several major investigations that could use someone with your skills." Zora gazed out the window at Ridgewood County passing by. She had lived here as Professor Williams, building relationships, teaching students, becoming part of a community, even if it had all been a cover. The thought of leaving brought mixed emotions. "I've been thinking about something else," she said slowly. "The police academy reached out. They want me to develop a new ethics curriculum for cadets based on what we uncovered here. A chance to address the root of the problem." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Training the next generation. Preventing corruption before it starts. It's good work. Important work," Zora added. "This case showed me how a few corrupt officers can poison an entire department. But it also showed me how many good officers stay silent out of fear or uncertainty. If we can reach them before those patterns set in." 2 weeks later, the jury returned with their verdict. All 7 officers were found guilty on multiple counts, including civil rights violations, evidence tampering, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The sentences would come later, but the message was clear. The badge did not place anyone above the law. The case sparked a national conversation about police accountability. Departments across the country began reviewing their own practices. Ridgewood County implemented sweeping reforms, including a citizen oversight committee and mandatory body cameras that could not be turned off during duty hours. Most significantly, the case triggered reviews of every arrest made by the convicted officers. To date, 27 convictions had been overturned, with more under review. People who had lost years of their lives to wrongful imprisonment were being released, their records expunged. On a crisp fall morning, almost exactly a year after her cover was blown, Zora stood before a classroom of police cadets at the academy. Behind her, a presentation slide showed the faces of those who had been wrongfully convicted by the Ridgewood officers. "These are the real victims of police corruption," she told the attentive cadets. "Not just abstract concepts like justice or trust, but real people with real lives. Remember their faces when you're tempted to cut corners, when you witness a colleague abusing their authority, when you think that the end justifies the means." She moved through the classroom, making eye contact with the future officers. "The badge you'll soon wear is a symbol of public trust. When you violate that trust, you don't just harm the individuals you directly wrong, you damage the entire system of justice. You make it harder for every good officer trying to do the right thing." After class, a young cadet approached her, hesitant but determined. "Agent Williams, I wanted to ask, how did you do it? Live undercover for 3 years, knowing what those officers were doing, seeing the harm they caused, and not lose faith?" Zora considered the question carefully. "I never lost faith in what policing should be," she finally said. "I lost faith in some individuals who abused their power, but I always believed in the possibility of change. That's why I'm here now, talking to you and your classmates." She gestured toward the hallway where cadets were heading to their next class. "Every person out there has the potential to be the kind of officer who stands up for what's right, even when it's difficult. My job is to help you recognize those moments when they come, and give you the tools to make the right choice." That evening, Zora visited the community center in the neighborhood most heavily targeted by the corrupt officers. A support group had formed there for those affected by wrongful arrests and convictions. Though she could have sent another agent, Zora made a point of attending regularly, listening to stories, answering questions when she could. Today, a woman approached her after the meeting. the mother who had lost custody of her children due to planted evidence. Her conviction had been one of the first overturned after the trial. "I got them back," she said, showing Zora pictures of her children on her phone. "Last week, the judge restored full custody." "That's wonderful," Zora said, genuinely moved. "I wanted to thank you," the woman continued, "not just for what you did with the case, but for coming here, for listening to us. Most people in your position would have moved on to the next big case." Zora smiled, feeling something settle within her. For 3 years, she had lived as Professor Williams, teaching about justice in theory. Now, as Agent Williams, she was seeing justice in practice, imperfect and slow but real. "This is the work," she said simply. "Not just catching the bad actors, but rebuilding what they broke. It takes longer. It's harder to measure, but it matters just as much." As she left the community center, Zora glanced back at the group still talking inside. The case that had consumed 3 years of her life was officially closed, but its effects continued to ripple outward. Lives restored. Systems reformed. Future officers trained with a clearer understanding of their responsibility. She had gone undercover to expose corruption. In the process, she had discovered something more valuable: the power of truth to heal, to rebuild, and ultimately, to transform.